Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. Now, I'm sorry about the brief hiatus we took. We had a little bit of scheduling conflict, and it turns out the week or two we take off, all hell decides to break loose. Now, I know I usually start up most episodes that way, but especially this time. Now, I have no need to tell any of you watching this, at least I hope I don't, that the United States is quite literally on fire. There's what started out as riots are now more so massive protests, which there's more intermittent violence now. It's not as bad as it was during the initial incident, which, of course, I'm sure you all know at this point. Yeah, black guy killed by cops. In this case, I can concede there may have been something that was going wrong, but at this point, I really don't think anyone cares, whether it be the people protesting, whether it be the people in Washington or people on our side. At this point, I think the initial incident that sparked this off is irrelevant. I know this is going to be a bit of an absurd comparison, but it's like World War One. After a certain point, nobody cared that this Austrian Archduke got assassinated. It was not about that anymore. And again, on a much smaller scale, of course, I think we're seeing something similar here, where yes, this one thing happened, but it is completely irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. And again, it's only been like what 3 weeks since this happened, and then of course there was the other case they tried to play up, and of course, I mean, it's an election year, 2020. It's Donald Trump, it's Joe Biden. They're really trying to play up the racial animus card, but it seems to be really successful this time, especially compared to 2015, 2016, with the original Black Lives Matter movement, with the I think it was in Dallas where that one incident went down with the assassination of the cops there. But point being, that all looks like child's play compared to whatever the hell is going on now. And I'm not even talking about just the violent parts of it. I'm talking about even the non-violent parts. The fact that we have these massive protest movements amidst this global pandemic, mind you. Which again, some things, I wouldn't say the entire thing. I'd say some things about that are at least being called into question now, which we'll touch on. But point being is, it hasn't only stayed in Minneapolis where it happened. It's spread to other parts of the state of Minnesota, spread to other parts nationally. You've seen D.C., you've seen Seattle, you've seen a lot of these other places. And not only that, but it is spread globally. Pretty much there's a Western expat community. There are protests. And I'll get into some of the statue vandalism in London. Again, we got a full show ahead of us. But I'm just a bit shocked that, I leave for 2 weeks and I come back to this shit.
It's astonishing. I haven't seen anything like this. And as you say, trying to top Dallas, which I think was a shock for many people, because there were 11 police officers that were killed and 5 of them died. And then the next week, 3 more in a different southern state were executed as well. I think the difference this time, not that police officers weren't killed, they were, but they were not reported quite as well. And that's primarily because there were so many cities burning down. I think there were 2 cops that were killed in California and Oakland. Several were injured. And as you say, this is now much more than George Floyd's death. I think initially, the first few days, they wanted everyone with first-degree murder charges, all 4 officers, and so on. And of course, the claims were that this was a racist act, even though the police officer in the spotlight, has an Asian girlfriend. Oh wait, maybe he is.
Wow, well, I'm sold. That fact right there convinced me that he's all right. No other man would enact such violence on a black man unless he were an Asian woman. But continue.
Right. So, but I think now at this point, I think we realize we're seeing basically the Blue Empire gobble up the Red Empire of America, and part of the projection, as you see now, of American colonies accepting, the same protests, gathering there, toppling statues. Not that I think those statues necessarily should be up, but I mean, even Poland and Hungary had George Floyd protests. Of course, I would not doubt that many of the participants were bussed in. But that tells you about the unity with which all of this is moving. To say nothing of the generals essentially telling Trump that this is a coup. If you get reelected, you're going to be removed. Mattis saying that the country can remain united without a president is a very, very bold statement. I think that's the first time not only any prominent American has said that, but an American general, no less. So that's the way I look at this. And America is definitely, it's morphing into a different America. Now, do I believe that America is going to fall? No, far from it. It's a kind of a reorganization. It's kind of, I would say it's a kind of reset to a point where it would have been had Donald Trump not been elected. And this is what it's taken in order to get to that point. So, all the pause stuff, of course, is going to be amplified. But I think the most important thing is that Trump cannot be reelected into the White House. He cannot re-enter it by any means. And I think that's what this is essentially all about now. That's what it's morphed into. I mean, we're talking about 9 or 10 unarmed Black people that were wrongly killed, murdered by police in a country of 340 million, roughly speaking. That it's awfully low compared to other countries. Everybody knows the FBI statistics. It doesn't matter. The people on the street, we shouldn't ignore that there's something already in place in these people, ideologically speaking, that they can accept these terms. You can look at them kneeling as a way for, the violence of these protests to pass over them. In other words, I'm on your side. Don't harm me. So I think that's an interesting characteristic, but I think a lot of these people are, I think, passionately on board. And I think that this is going to be very problematic because I think most people in America right now realize that there's no way of unifying the country. You have a situation of people with, even some socialists agree with this, where there's people of such desperate and unique ethnicities and political persuasions that they cannot stand living in this present country. And I think we are in some way witnessing, as much as it's a consolidation of power, as much as it's a reunification and to sort of, put things right. Because one of the things Mattis said was that that they would become the leaders of the world again if this was successful. Well, as much as it's all that, it is a decline, and it won't be like 1968 because the demographics aren't there to support it. We're not going to have people who were Democrats migrating to the Republican Party and people who were Republicans migrating to the Democratic Party. It's just not possible anymore. And people
and Trump is no Nixon. He's not going to crack down on these. He'll tweet law and order in all caps, but at the end of the day, he's going to be like, well, and he's gonna pussyfoot around it like he always does.
Right. But I do see this as a moment of decline. What it will take to unify the country will require an incredible amount of exertion. You're going to have people leaving major cities for their own safety. It's going to be very hard to put the genie back in the bottle, and I don't see it happening. Also, I think added to that is We have a looming economic crisis, and the crypto yuan is rising. When they figure that out, and it won't be far long, they will be able to avoid all the sanctions. And I think, I mean, we're already seeing a dollar decline because of the protests and the violence that's going on. So it's going to be a very, very problematic future for America. Very.
Oh, absolutely. And you're talking about the irreparable damage to the social fabric, which I do agree. There was a time when there could be a consolidation of American identity, whether that was in this Christian waspish sort of identity, whether it be this pan-European identity where this Polish Catholic is just like this this Scots-Irish guy who's been here for 400 years or whatever, and then post 1965, of course, it was we're a melting pot. We're all different colors, but we can unite around American values. All those different attempts seem to have failed to form a cohesive American identity. Now, like I said, I don't think this is the balkanization of America. I don't think this is the death and collapse of the country, but I think this is the collapse of a certain era, a certain epoch of this country. To the point where, yeah, we tried to do the pseudo diversity, we're a melting pot where we all just love each other and get along and unite around our common values and the Constitution. I think that sort of post 1965 narrative is dead, and we are entering into a new era where a new narrative, a new identity will have to be built. Now, again, I think that'll probably be one of the sort of the racial guilt, the white guilt sort of thing. Well, oh, of course we're white and we're sorry for what we did and blah 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 blah, and then you have to recognize our oppression. We're black, and then I don't know. The Hispanics going to be a weird one. How they're going to fit that in? Because I'm sure you've seen things all over the place where it's not just racial tension between blacks and whites. Racial tensions all around. I mean, we've seen the return of the fabled rooftop Koreans of the 1990s. It's getting wild, and they have to. I mean, they've been building up to this for years, but it seems like they're finally putting the pieces in place to, I would say, at least finally institutionalize this. Now, how long that will take, how successful it will be, your guess is probably as good as mine at this point. And like I said, I don't see the collapse of the United States as a political entity. Definitely not the collapse of the United States as a geopolitical entity, because it is still much too powerful. But as you said, some things with the crypto yuan and the rise of Russia and China and the developments in Europe, time will tell with that. But it is.
I mean, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to add to what you were saying about the racial tensions, and that is, as long as there are white people who are willing to say that they are responsible for every failing of America, and that's a limited resource, as long as that's there, that can act to placate certain groups enough that they can stave off, let's say the inevitable, let's say a very chaotic period. However, it's not a limitless resource, and even when this is happening, we're noticing already a much more dysfunctional America. Like, getting Hillary in office is not going to, fix this.
Or Joe Biden and his powerful woman of color running mate is not going to mend the social fabric.
Right, and I think it was obvious by June 1st that, based on the level of riots and the violence, that there was no way that the genie was going to be put back into the bottle, to use that phrase over again, or that the fabric of America was strong enough that it could restructure itself. It's not there.
Or whenever a corporation came out in support of it the day after.
Yeah, right. And also you have a sizable amount of the population that realizes that there seems to be in the background a kind of a unified effort on the parts of the protest organizers, U.S. military, corporations, that all agree on the same basic message. It doesn't matter if CNN is attacked. They're not really eating their own. They're not. CNN will just get new windows They'll just get a new CNN logo for the for the front. They'll clean it off. That's not the point. They know nothing substantive is going to harm them, and they know that they can placate the public. And this is what they eventually have to do in order to placate the public. But it's not possible. And I think whites in America realize it. It's not possible in order to keep the country intact without these very public displays of kneeling. And you see some people even lying down or washing black people's feet. Like, that can only go on for so long, because as long as the expectations that the minorities have, as long as that they don't seem to manifest, this will happen again. And I don't see how whites can keep accepting the same message that again it's their fault. And so expectations will not be met, and that's going to go for just about everybody, especially after the lockdown. So yeah. So we can expect far more riots in the future.
And a couple things I want to touch on, both of which you brought up, is the generals, Mattis, coming out and throwing their support pretty much behind the protesters, behind what could generally amount to the anti-Trump camp. And Tucker Carlson, who I have to admit has been absolutely on fire this past week and a half, 2 weeks, he laid out that, 90s, the liberal establishment took control of the Pentagon. You think of the military as this conservative bastion, which admittedly among a lot of the rank and file is, but you get up to the top, you get up to the people like Mattis, the people in the Pentagon, they are, I would not only say in line with the liberal agenda, but even more so than a lot of people in Washington. Because in D.C., you'll at least get somebody who will occasionally push back, but it seems like all these generals, major generals, whatever, admirals, all seem to be completely in line with not only liberalism domestically, but liberalism abroad, where we have to protect the pride parades both in Washington and Tel Aviv, and just name any various Western or Western vassal capital, and I think you'll see the point standing there. But and then just
very much so. I think Trump's proclamation from last year that he is going to work to legalize gay marriage everywhere on the planet, is him basically placating the Pentagon, but also arms manufacturer, which many of them, of course, sponsor gay pride parades and so on.
Yeah, but I mean, we are seeing a complete overhaul of the American empire where, I mean, this has been going on for a while. We've been documenting this. Where under the Bush years, it was the strong and tough, nobody messes with America, we'll go in and do what we want, to the Obama, and funny enough, through Trump, who was more or less a continuation of Obama in that regard, with we're a kind, benevolent power that will support these forward-thinking and progressive values. Now, Trump has been less on the nose about that. Again, his foreign policy, like in all areas, has been rather schizophrenic, where he will do the tough man America act, and then he'll do the multilateral, we're an empire of happiness and tolerance act that, again, you saw under Obama. So it is interesting in terms of Trump being both a rejection of the red and blue empire, while simultaneously being a fusion of them. Probably the worst aspects of both. Again, I don't know any other way to put it than schizophrenia.
Yeah, I think you put it very well.
But yeah, pretty much he's bending the knee, to borrow that phrase, to placate whoever he thinks will keep him in power and keep his smiling face on the television and whatever. But it has been just a wild ride, and with Trump's talk last week, with his rhetoric last week saying we need to send in the National Guard, we need to bring back law and order. Law and order in all caps has been something he's tweeted at least 3 times throughout this crisis, and then of course all the usual things, make America great again, just the usual platitudes you get from Trump. And I can't believe they would defund the police departments. Look, us and the Republicans, we stand strong behind the police, even though Again, then he waffles on that, saying, "Oh, of course we care about the concerns regarding police brutality." Blah 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 blah. He's doing what he does, except he's in overdrive mode. And the joke was for a while is Kushner's going to tell him to go take a knee on the White House lawn. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised, but he's shown himself to be completely impotent to his base. I mean, Tucker Carlson, who has never really shied away from criticism of Trump, or more broadly the Trump administration, uh, has hit him on his inaction. A lot of people you would think were diehard Trump supporters, not only like media figures, just social media figures, but just everyday people, like the kind of people who still wear their MAGA hats, were even critical of Trump for his inaction. At least for a time now. That's petered off with the riots, but as they turn back into peaceful protests, as it were, that rhetoric has calmed down. But again, it's only a matter of time before these things are going to ebb and flow. We're going to get some other incident. Look, if I had to take a guess, we're going to get at least three more racially charged incidents this summer. Now, how legitimate they are, if it really is an unjust killing by a cop or whatever, but there will be at least three cases they make into national media stories again to drum up this racial animus, in which case we'll probably get more violence.
Right, and the bar has been set that it shall never happen, or else, the country burns down. I mean, it's ridiculous. Whites, for instance, are killed by police more so. Of course, people can make an argument that this is a white country essentially, and that's why they don't burn it down. And this can go back and forth, but ultimately, what this demonstrates is an incredible division. And the truth is, Trump is not responsible for this division. Trump election victory is a sign of the division.
Yeah, these events caused Trump, not the other way around. We've hammered on this point for years now.
That's right. And so that's why he's in there. And because it was at a boiling point. Because they were tired of Obama. Obama literally lost voters who voted twice for him and then voted for Trump. But, that's partly because people, Hillary is a very unlikable person, besides just policies.
Yeah, and Trump was, in at least 2016, a fresh face, somebody who'd never seriously been on the political stage before. Now, he had his run in politics. He'd go to the RNC, the DNC, or whatever. He had his third-party run, like, sometime in the early 2000s. But point being is, this time when he was seriously there, he pretty much did a watered-down version of Pat Buchanan's 92 campaign, repackaged it, threw it out there, got elected, and then, welcome to where we are today. And, the point being is, I know this debate gets brought up a lot, especially in the retrospect, like what went wrong with Trump, whether he was groomed for this and sort of just controlled op figure the whole time, or whether he was actually subverted in the process. But point being is, I go back to the point, yeah, he probably was controlled op, but he was probably their last choice. As we covered last episode, Romney was more preferable to Donald Trump at this point. And Romney, he's another one who's been out there standing in solidarity with the protests and. Yeah. I mean, no surprise on that. But point being is, I mean, you're even getting like a lot of Republicans you wouldn't expect. Like Tom Cotton put out some statement about that, and he's like one of these really rock-ribbed conservative Republicans. And admittedly, he's good on quite a few issues, especially like when it comes to immigration stuff. But then, you get this stuff, with it. So, again, it's nothing new. It's all just in overdrive right now.
Yeah. Trump will be scapegoated in order to bring the country back together, but it can't be brought back together. So it's going to have to limp along.
Yeah, it's going to have to limp along until they can cobble together some other quote-unquote American identity for the next 20 to 30 years. Again, that's pretty much what it's been in cycles of. Like I said, that we had the we're a good old WASP nation, we're a pan-European nation, we're a melting pot of diversity nation, and again, now we're going to be we're the racial justice nation, where we where we take responsibility for the faults of our past and blah 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 blah. And how long they can stretch that out, who knows, before they have to come up with a new one. But I mean, pretty much that's what our country has been on. I would say for at least the past 100 years. You could probably say, I would say since the end of the Civil War, if I'm being completely honest. If I'm
Yeah.
zooming out completely. But point being is, I think we've done a pretty good brief coverage of the internal strife of the United States. Covered what pretty much everyone else has, and I mean, there's people, pretty much everyone you can think of has gone in depth about this, whether it be the most mainstream figure or the most obscure figure. Everyone has given their take on this. But you want to get into some of the ripple effects throughout the American protectorates in Europe?
Sure, sure. It's America does a color revolution in itself, and then it spreads. It's American Spring.
Yes.
Yeah, let's get into that.
So, I think London, the UK, has probably been the biggest one, no surprise. In which case, that's where a lot of the vandalisms of the statues have been taking place, and that's what a lot of the main focus been being on. And the main two that really stuck out were, of course, the Winston Churchill and the Abraham Lincoln ones. Now, both of which, these are supposed to be the racial justice, we fought for freedom and equality sort of protesters, which, again, you're going after the guy who you idolize for, ending slavery, and then you're also going after the guy who was one of the key players in your foundational myth of World War II. So, it is funny watching them attack these bases for their own narratives. I do have to admit, but and again, not that
Yeah,
I'm fans of either Lincoln or Churchill, which I've been over this. I think everyone knows where I stand on that issue. I think everyone knows where you probably stand on that issue. But point
yeah,
being is, I can't help but like, yeah, okay, these people are hooligans. They're degenerates. They shouldn't be vandalizing public property, statue of historical figures, whatever. But I part of me just can't help but revel in the fact of these statues they're destroying. And funny enough, what I saw is when they attacked the Churchill statue, uh, there was a statue, I can't remember his name, but pretty much he's credited with the foundation of the modern police force in the UK, just a mile down the road from there.
yeah. Also in the States, I think it was in Boston that they defaced a monument to the all-black regiments that fought in the American Civil War. That was basically the subject of the movie Glory with Denzel Washington. Like they even defaced that. I think what we're looking at is just frustration and absolute negation of everything that came before. It's just an absolute total negation. And if you look at the ethnicities in, especially in Britain, you'll notice that it's a awful lot of white people, right? So yes, there's a lot of collective guilt and so on. Even though many of these figures have been dead for over like 200 years, the truth is, as you mentioned, they're a defacing of Winston Churchill, and in the States, Abraham Lincoln. There's a desire um, for a complete, like an utter, I don't know, like an utter revamping. If ever there was a time to, I don't want to get Yuri Bezmezov, but like for a new programming, it would be now. Um, these protests have an incredible negation about them. Like there's even a hint of them just like not quite like just wanting to destroy civilization altogether, but a big part of that, or a big part of the identity of this particular civilization.
Yeah, I
Um,
think we're witnessing the creation of a
but
new foundational myth. Like I said, your previous two, which the ones they hammer on,
yeah,
were the
yeah,
Civil War and World War II. The heroes who ended slavery and ended white supremacist fascism, whatever. look, they're still going to hamper on that. They're still going to pull the parts that are convenient for them about that. They won't mention that a bunch of southern wasps were the guys storming the beach of Normandy and not bisexuals from Portland. But point being, I mean, again, they'll do some historical revisionism and have the black lesbians who fought the Nazis, whatever. But point being is, they're re they're building a new foundational myth based on the racial justice narrative. Now, not that they haven't played
Yeah.
on this before, but they're making this the primary focus of this. Where, as I said, World War II, the Cold War, the Civil War, those are the ones of the previous era. And like I said, that isn't going away. They're still going to pull on that as much as they can, but they're forming something new. In which case, I want to keep this theme of new civilizations going as I get into some of the stuff about Hungary later. But again, I'm going to put that off because I want to go on a bit about more of the protests in Europe in general. Pretty much every
Sure.
major European capital has had a protest. Now, the notable ones I noticed, Ukraine didn't, which is a bit of a surprise seeing as some of the things they did.
So disappointed.
Romania, Moldova, and Russia didn't. But Poland and Hungary did. Now, of course, they were both organized by Western liberal women, which no surprise. The Baltic states had one. I think it's the same case there. Japan had one organized mostly by white expats, and you're seeing a theme. Funny enough, I think there was only one in Africa, and that was in Nigeria, but not even South Africa. No, not even Zimbabwe. Some of these other places which have had their own history of racial tensions. No, I think Nigeria is the only one. Now, of course, none in East Asia except Japan and Korea. China didn't have one. Vietnam didn't have one. Now, of course, the Chinese funded media outlets like the English language media outlet, they did the thing that they do. It's like, oh well, tisk 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 America. I can't believe you do the racial things. Again, sort of just like the gay little back and forth thing major powers do with their propaganda outlets. Like, again, you see us do it like, oh, tisk tisk tisk, China's homophobic, or Russia's homophobic, and Russia and China will be like, oh, you guys are racist. So again, just sort of like the fight on the sort of new narrative. Or another example is the sort of fight over the Holocaust with Russia and Poland. Just these sort of little things. But beyond that, again, most of the protests were in Western and Central Europe, with a few scattered throughout Eastern Europe, which again is admittedly is funny. And I mean, some of these countries they didn't need like Americans living abroad to organize them. Like, I mean, for example, the UK, France. France is a funny story that I'll get back to. But like again, the countries you'd think of: UK, Scandinavian states, Netherlands, Belgium, whatever. You didn't need that. But again, when you get over into Poland, when you get over into Hungary, when you get over into Slovakia, it's not. I'm sorry, but it isn't Ivan and Istvan organizing these things.
I mean, how does it even make sense? Like, I remember first time I went to Moscow. I think it was the fourth day that I saw that I saw the first black person. Like in a city of over 13 million. Like, for a lot of these countries, like, yeah, police brutality bad, maybe stop knee holds, choke holds, but it's not, on a fundamental level, it's not really relevant to them. However, they understand on another fundamental level, that is, who they're an ally with, or what power structure they belong to.
Yeah, who pays the bills?
Who pays the bills? They know that they have to participate in this. There's no question about that. They have to act. And this is really the destructive ability of American culture, is it replaces the culture and history of every country that lies with it. And, no matter how parallel some of Britain and America's histories are, they do differ. And, so there's an overlap there. How about in Ireland, who never owned slaves, who were themselves slaves, who survived the famine, and have had like attacks by Africans, by blacks on on three separate individuals. One, I think, might be dead, all young people. So that's what it does. Americanization destroys your culture and it replaces it with its culture and its history and its problems, even when the facts on the ground do not align with it.
Yeah, like again, like it. Oh, you're some Slovak. I'm sure you care so much about American racial justice when most of your history has been ruled by foreign powers, and like again, you make these points where like it is they have to submit to the narrative of America, where they have to care about they have to care about the plantations and the slavery and the Jim Crow laws, when quite literally, even if you want to buy into the fact that you're collectively responsible for what your ancestors did, even by that logic, makes no sense for these people, and even for the more powerful countries in Europe. But like, again, how many Germans in Germany were responsible for whatever? But point being is, like you said, it has to be a submission to that because they know who's in charge, they know who sets the nerves, they know who pays the bills. Ultimately, it all boils down to that.
Yeah, yeah. And so everybody has to play along with this as if they're another, state of America.
You know, I'm probably the millionth person to make this joke, but I can't help but bring up that all it takes to disperse one of these crowds, any of these European ones, is you just got to have somebody take the mic and say, I'm glad you came for this Gypsy Lives Matter rally. We really appreciate you being here. Again, like I said, it's been made a million times, but I can't help but repeat it because it just really drives home, like, the sort of. And I suppose that goes back to the Americanization, where, I mean, how many of the American elites or the even the American, I would say, bureaucratic class cares if some Frenchman is prejudiced against the Gypsies? That doesn't interfere with American power, so they're not going to care.
Right.
But it still is a fine point to bring up. But I suppose that out of the way, we want to talk about building civilizations, new foundational myths. You want to get into Hungary?
Yes, yes, definitely.
So I made a video yesterday reading an English transcript of Orban's speech given on June 6th, commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Treaty of Trianon, which did expire on its 100th anniversary. Now, the expiration was on June 4th. The speech was on June 6th, which is also, coincides with D-Day, which I'll come back to that point. But you had him pretty much talk about Hungary's history, how it has been surrounded by enemies and yet prevails, and yet is a standing, functional nation state today that is defining its own destiny. The separation of ethnic Hungarians outside of its borders, talking about its plans for the future, how it wants to cooperate with the other peoples of Central Europe to build a new destiny and to uh, really be able to define its own fate. Funny enough, there was actually some praise of the Austrian Empire and, of course, later Austro-Hungarian Empire in there. So it was a very Central European-centric sort of speech where he appealed to the Slovaks, he appealed to the Poles, he appealed to the Romanians by name in the speech. I'm pretty sure he appealed to the Balkans, Serbs and Croats, which yeah, interesting there. But point being is, it was a strong, powerful speech. It sounded like he actually had a vision for not only the future of his country, but the future of his regions. And I wouldn't say brother people because, again, I'm not Hungarian. I don't know the situation on the ground there, but at least what he presented as what you could say similar peoples who have a more or less shared history, at least from the sort of narrative set forth by the speech. And he went hard at the Western powers. He called out by name the Americans, the British, and the French. Interestingly enough, he called out the Soviet Union, but he didn't call out Russia or the Russian Empire by name, which, I think there's...
Yeah,
I might
that's
be reading too
interesting.
much into that, but I do think it's interesting. He did sort of say in terms of the modern era, like, denounce both West and East. Now, by West, we know what he means. Now, by
Yeah.
East, I'm not sure whether he means Russia, just China, whatever, or the Middle East. But point
Mm.
being is, I think he more so did that to define Central Europe, like Central Eastern Europe, as its own sort of power block with him at the center. But point being, it was a very powerful speech, and like I said in my video yesterday, I would I would fall and kiss the feet of whoever gave a speech like that in the West, even if it were just 10%, even if it were just 5% of that. I would be over the moon if Trump gave something 1% of that.
Right. I mean, it's easy to understand the disappointment, and like most of us, we had a lot of hope initially for Trump, and I think also we understood that America was an empire and it had certain obligations that it couldn't quite make a speech like that because of the amount of diversity in America, as well as in my country, Canada. However, that's a myth-defining speech on the part of Orban. He's really contextualizing their past, and he's really pointing a way forward for them based on their past. He is offering some kind of hope, and as I think we've both kind of have guessed, and we probably have already even said it, he is, I think, predicting either the fall of the EU or going definitely into a hard two-tier system. I think he foresees that. And it's, he talks about the East and the West, but he lays a lot more criticism on the West, including its hypocrisy, than he mentions about the East. No country in the East is defined. Like you say, it's only mentioned to redefine his country and his country's region. So I would say that he's defining basically what the challenges will be for this century for Hungarians. And he's contextualized that within a history. Of course, there'll be some people who'll come, they'll complain and they'll say, well, the Nazi, Hungary sided with the Nazis and so on and so. Well, lots of other countries did. You guys don't have problems with Lithuanians and Estonians doing that, or Croatians, right? Like, again, it comes down to empire. If you toe the line, we will excuse this. If you don't, we'll bring it up, right? And the fact of the matter is, it's been over 75 years, and countries need to go on. Some things are just part of the past, and that's the way it is.
Yeah, and I think we see with sort of the reshaping of narratives in the West that they realize most of the people who lived through World War II are close to death at this point. Most of them who are alive were young children. Pretty much everyone who fought in that war is dead at this point. Again, you'll see the odd 90, 100-year-old World War II veteran at various parades or commemoration events, but how many of them are there left? Again, there's not that many. Within the next decade, there will be no more World War II veterans. Or, again, there may be a handful, but an insignificant amount. We already arguably are an insignificant amount, but definitely come 2030, there's not going to be any of them left. And what we have here, again, is the reshaping of narratives both in the West and the East. And honestly, I know we're only 20 years into the century, but it may be a bit of a stretch, but so far I think this has been the most important speech of the 21st century so far, and I think that will be vindicated in the coming years. It's, again, the reshaping of a narrative. After the fall of the Soviet Union, after the fall of these various other power structures and the rise and domination of the American empire and the reign of quote-unquote liberal democracy, you're seeing a country that was supposedly supposed to be like the first and foremost beneficiary of this. Hungary was always an unruly member of the Soviet sphere of influence. They had their uprisings in 1956. They were one of the first communist governments to overthrow their government. Again, when they're supposed to be like the primary beneficiaries, the primary spearhead of liberalism and democracy in Eastern Europe in the 90s and 2000s, you get this guy in power in the 2010s, 2020s, pretty much saying that Central Europe could really use an empire. That would be great. That's a very, very gross simplification of it. But at the end of the day, he's saying, yeah, we need to be our own power block. We need to be our own civilizational block again.
Right, and he is a very definitive example of what our adversaries call an illiberal democracy, as if a liberal democracy is the only valid democracy. And I don't want to harp, um, on who gets credit for this. Orban gets credit for this, but um, in many ways, Putin outlined this approach. I think other leaders in the so-called Central Europe have basically taken some notes on how to manage this, and I don't think anyone has done as good a job as Orban. You're talking about a politician that once received a grant from Soros and getting kicked him out. It's like, what Stalin level of illiberal democracy are we on here?
Yeah, it is interesting seeing how many of the former backers of Orban have been completely screwed over by him. It is pretty entertaining to see, I have to admit.
Yeah, yeah. Like I say, he's gotten some breathing room, so he's gotten rid of women's studies. He's gotten rid of transgender rights. He's gotten rid of Soros and the Open Society. Many of these NGOs are participating directly right now in these protests that we're seeing, whether in Europe or in the U.S.
I have to tell you what kills me.
People can argue and say, well, Finkelstein helped them do it, but the truth is, yeah, and he's taking advantage of it. Imagine not taking advantage of it. Imagine not even taking advantage of it. We can talk about how we lost the institutions through the slow climb of these nefarious characters, but the truth is, like, if you have an opportunity to take back your institutions, you damn well do it.
Yeah, like, again, there's unsavory figures around every politician. There's unsavory figures around every leader. But in terms of the power dynamic, I don't see these people who help Orban come to power. I don't see the level of control they have over him, for example, than the people who helped Trump come in power. Like, again, I don't think Orban has a Kushner. There's nobody whispering in his ear to shoot himself in the foot constantly. Point being is, I'm not saying that there isn't any outside influence, there isn't any nefarious elements within the Orban government, but he seems to have them at bay at the very least. And the other point I wanted to make is going back to Orban's speech is a phrase he kept on using was Carpathian Basin, which, again, when I say trans-Carpathian rights, that's the only trans rights he believes in.
So true, so true. Yeah, I haven't made up my mind about Trump, whether... Like, on the one hand, I notice all these generals turn on him, and I think, like, on some level, he naively really believed that he was president. And on another level, I think, based on his family's history and his family's history with, a certain tribe and their real estate power in New York, maybe not. Maybe it's very hard for me to make up my mind, but I think on some level he really did get duped. I don't think he's acting all of this. I just don't. Now, how much does he really is he in disagreement with on Kushner? Like on Israel, zero. On this kind of stuff, Kushner's thinking, if you have another Ohio State, you're not going to get elected. And another Ohio State is very likely when you have, I don't know, what was it at that time? 12, 14 cities on fire? Like, I don't want to agree with Kushner. And maybe, bringing in the National Guard was the right thing. I'm just saying that there was a difference of opinion. Yeah, and we shouldn't presume that, like, I don't presume that everything Kushner does and Trump does, it's a fake, it's a fake adversarial relationship, or it's a fake, congenial relationship. I don't pretend to know. I'm not there. I don't want to, I can't guess. I can point out the one that I think, yeah, they're in total agreement. He was always going to do this. But, he was, I think he was well aware of like what the divisions were, and that's how he won. He knew he was given the right rhetoric, but I think he already knew what the right rhetoric was in order to win.
Yeah. Just a couple things. It was just a small semantic detail that was Kent State, but point stands regardless. Point number two about it, like, I see Trump as a very hard figure to work with. He seems buffoonish. He seems arrogant. He seems like a headache for the people at the management. Because again, I'm starting to lean towards sides like, yeah, they probably groomed him for this. There was probably some plan for this, but just because there's a plan for that, and just because they want to do this, doesn't necessarily mean he's the most compliant actor or even the best actor for it. To the point where, yeah, he probably does butt head with Kushner a lot because, like I said, he's a bit of a stubborn ass if you haven't noticed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is a point I've been making. At this point, I don't know if I'm going to vote, who I'm going to vote for, whatever. But the most compelling case I see for Trump right now is the fact that all the people I despise will have the displeasure of working with him for another 4 years if he wins again.
Yeah, I dare say that Trump winning in 2020 would be even more delicious than 2016.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because to get into the whole thing on Biden now, of course, Biden's going to have his woman of color running mate, but he also is not the most stable or sane actor they could pick. And the joke I see keep going around, the joke I've made myself is, it's going to take one bad day of Biden's senility for him to drop a hard R on, a Black Lives Matter activist who tries to storm the stage Bernie style. It takes one thing like that to set him off because, I mean, you've seen him hold back his, the look fat or the, I think it was like, you're going to talk that kind of shit to me, like when he was confronting that one guy in Michigan. But point being is, it takes one thing to set him off, and knowing Biden, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a hard R just waiting to get out in there.
Right, and let's not forget the DNC has not said that he is like the official candidate. So there's trepidation, and if I put on my tinfoil hat, I would say that there's a lot of people that are very happy right now with the success of the protests, because what they were, I think, quite afraid of, based on that Politico article a few weeks back or a week back, was if there was an economic recovery that Biden would lose. However, I think what has happened, it probably seals the deal for Biden at this point. I think it all depends on who Biden has as his running mate. That's when the deal is sealed, so to speak.
Yeah, and like you said, I pretty much couldn't have said it better myself, but in terms of that, I do think this is actually a very, the final point I'll make in all of this is we're going to keep kind of short tonight because there was a lot to cover, and, only so much of what you can say without repeating yourself is, it's an interesting narrative when you compare what's happening within the United States, what's happening in the UK, and the Western world at large, compared to what's happening in Central Europe, or Eastern Europe, if you will, to the point where within the same time frame, you had one descend completely into, well, what amounts to hyperliberalism and racial politics, and another one talking about rebuilding its historical identity and taking it into the next century. And one last point I'll make on that Orban speech is he gave it on June 6th. He gave it on D-Day. I can guarantee you when the media finally picks up on this, now when they will, I don't know, they'll probably wait for all this to die down first, because occasionally they'll come out and attack Hungary as a neo-fascist state, or the rise of dictatorship in Europe and the fall of liberalism. They're going to hammer him for giving a fascistic speech on D-Day, which again is probably one of the most holy days of the calendar of the liberal world order. It's the defining moment of World War II for the West, and again they'll play that up. One thing you've seen going around is liberal journalists tweeting pictures of the beach landing, saying this is the largest Antifa rally in history. Like again, you know the sort of thing. And
It's
when they
so
finally
cringe.
pick up on this, they're going to say, I can't believe he gave this on the holiest day on our calendar, and we can't stand for the rise of fascism and authoritarianism. This guy in Hungary, he's the next Hitler right here. But point being is, you're seeing simultaneously the shaping of these two narratives, and you can look at some of the comments Putin made about, what was it, 3 weeks ago, a month ago, talking about viewing Russia as its own civilization. You can look at the comments, look, love China, hate China. You have to admit they're doing pretty well for themselves right now, despite a little bit of setback with this whole pandemic thing. You can look at the comments Xi gives about Chinese identity and the future of China. You can compare those four instances, those four leaders. Now, admittedly, it's not like Hungary's on the same, power level or same scale as the United States, Russia, and China, but you're seeing a certain set going one way and a certain set spiraling into dissent. But I think that covers all of it for now. So it has been hell of a past couple weeks. I don't know really how else to put it. The point where, yeah, we're seeing. I wouldn't say the fall of the American Empire in real time, but we're seeing the restructuring. We're seeing the birth of a new narrative in real time. And lo and behold, what we have here is, I mean, look, I think we're far from out of the woods with this. Maybe with the violence, maybe with the upheaval, we're done at least now for the past couple weeks. But like I said, I have a feeling we're far from out of the woods with this, and expect a new narrative of racial justice and white privilege, and again, all the things they've been pushing for the past 5, 10 years to become enshrined as narratives. And I suppose before I repeat myself, I will have to bring this to a close. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and goodbye.